Ukraine isn't simply a country ravaged by war, as if there could be anything simple about what's happening there. It's a crime scene, the cliche that's common among people outside, like so many of us, describing our disbelief at the horrors we're seeing on every news bulletin, on the front page of papers. It doesn't work anymore. The vivid images and the reports of Ukrainian men and women and children lying dead in the streets or in basements, sometimes with their hands tied at the moment of murder, sometimes bearing the mark of torture, and the mass graves. Well, disbelief is no longer an option. It is inescapably real. We've seen the pictures, we've read the reports. On today's programme, in just a moment, I'm going to be talking to Louise Callahan, the Times correspondent who's there reporting on sights and scenes and conversations most of us couldn't have imagined before now. And maybe that's a failure of imagination on our part. Putin's soldiers have done this before, in Chechnya, in Syria. Only this war seems closer to home in so many ways for so many Europeans and others who see people and places that bit more like themselves, in places that are more like places they know. There's never been a more visible war, fought in real time on our smartphones, TVs and computer screens. And later on, I'm going to be discussing if the Ukraine war really is exploring new boundaries of savagery. Now, who'll answer for war crimes? Will anyone? The leading QC, Baroness Kennedy, is actively helping to compile a case to prosecute and punish the perpetrators. And she's joining me after 5. And later on, here on Drive, we're also going to be remembering the life of June Brown, who's better known for the part that she played for almost 3,000, I think, episodes, Dot Cotton. We'll have our own tribute to her later on the show. And we want to hear yours too. What are your favourite Dot Cotton moments? Text in on all your thoughts on what you're hearing today on the show, elsewhere, 87222. Start your message with the word Times as always, or you can send an email to my producer, Ollie, on studio@times.radio. Now, Times readers have been commenting online. Michael Blair says, it's a testimony, this is a tribute to June, that she is one of a handful of East End actors who'll always be remembered. Although not a particular fan of the show, I enjoy it for my wife's sake. She played her part with grace and humour. I hope they put a plaque up in the laundrette. Now, later on Drive today, why is Britain's effort to help and house Ukrainian refugees too far behind the glowing promises of our political leaders? And also the police fines for lockdown-busting parties in Downing Street and Whitehall, they keep stacking up. Will there be a political reckoning? Now, in the latest developments in Ukraine, the EU's announced a joint investigation team with Ukraine to probe the Russian war crimes and crimes against humanity. That's after the shocking images that have emerged from the town of Bucha. As bodies of civilians were found strewn on the streets of that town, it was once a symbol of resistance to the Russian invasion. Now it's become synonymous with the most serious abuses. We can talk to Tim Marshall first, our foreign affairs and security analyst regularly on the show. Tim, good afternoon to you.
Hello, John.
Can I ask you first, as I generally do, Tim, your thoughts and appreciation of the state of the war today, right now?
Ukrainians are, I don't know if they're in shock about Bucha, but it's taken the edge off the optimism that some of them were feeling due to the advances that their military had made. And the general prosecutor of Ukraine this afternoon has said that she thinks that things could be even worse in a town near Bucha called Borodyanka. I don't know if Louise can, in a few minutes, give us any more on that, but she's saying it could be even worse. The number of war crimes committed by Russians is incredibly high, she said. So, as I said, I think it's really been sobering for the Ukrainians to know what's happened. Overall, I think the big takeaway, John, is that the existence of an independent Ukraine with a capital city, Kyiv, it's not in question anymore as things currently stand, because they've won the Battle of Kyiv. When you look at the directions the Russian forces in the north are going, they're heading northwards up into Belarus and eastwards back towards Russia. Almost all of them are across the Dnieper River now. On the eastern side of it. There's a few units that they left behind because they've retreated in such bad shape that they've actually probably abandoned various units, and the Ukrainians are looking for them now. So that is positive if you take a Ukrainian view of it. The negative side is that then when you look at the way the battlefield is shaping up in the east, the Russians are in a position probably to take even more territory. They have actually taken quite a lot. I think that's sometimes overlooked. And so when we head towards a future ceasefire that we've discussed, if it freezes the conflict, just as last time it was frozen in 2014, and the Russians were left in a better position. The Russians will again be left in a better position if it's frozen to rebuild the 20% of the forces that they've already lost. Last bit on the military front, fighting in Mariupol, somehow amazingly, the remnants have held on. It's not completely fallen. And Mikhailov has been attacked with cluster bombs. That's down south. Diplomatic front, I'll try and be brief. Macron has called for a complete banning of Russian oil and coal. And that's quite a move because there's many EU countries which are reticent to get involved in that, especially Germany. And they're going to be discussing it on Wednesday. And two things which are related. There's been two elections over the weekend. Vučić was re-elected president in Serbia, and he's pro-Putin. Orban was re-elected in Hungary, and he is lukewarm towards the EU sometimes and considered pro-Putin. And I do think in the longer term and in the wider view, those two elections are worthy of just mentioning.
Yes. I mean, we're going to be going live to Poland at 5 o'clock when we're expecting the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss to join her Polish counterparts there and talk about the state of the conflict. That'll be live at 5. And you mentioned there the latest words of Emmanuel Macron of France saying there should be some sort of clampdown or reining in of use of Russian energy. Is there a timescale for that? Because Germany, for example, talks about reining in the use of Russian energy, but they don't want to do it too quickly because they rely on it so much.
Yeah, well, the time frame is Wednesday. And it's not just Macron, who, by the way, is, as you know, up for re-election this weekend in the first round of the French presidential elections. He and a few others are saying, look, on Wednesday, we need to make this decision. Now, it's going to be tough, and this is at a time when you really don't want to see the EU split, but it could split it, because the Germans may hold out, and if they do, then it gives cover to other people to hold out. And again, you have to look at it in the wider view that actually the Ukrainians, in some sense, I think, are temporarily on the front foot. And that goes back to the negotiations that you and I have discussed so often in this. At the moment, there's no talk of the negotiations because the Ukrainians are going to try and get as much territory back as possible to bleed the Russians so much before they go possibly for negotiations. So if the EU does keep that pressure on, and the UK outwit the EU will certainly be keeping as much pressure on as possible, then that creates the momentum for the Ukrainians to keep going forward. So, this is why the diplomacy and the military fronts are just so intertwined. So we'll know more on Wednesday. I think there will be pushback. We'll see if Macron holds the day.
All right, Tim, thank you so much. Tim Marshall there with his regular appreciation of what is going on the broader front and close up in Ukraine. Now, let me welcome to the programme Louise Callahan, the Times correspondent, who joins us on the line from Kyiv. Good afternoon to you, Louise.
Hi, good afternoon.
Louise, you've been reporting so vividly on the atrocities that have been coming to light where you are. Can I just ask you to share with those of us, most of us, nearly all of us, have no experience of what you've been seeing now and the conversations you've been having. Give us your sense, if you can, share some of what you've seen and some of the conversations around it.
Well, on Saturday, me and my colleagues drove out to this area south of a place called Bucha. So it's kind of this beautiful suburb or kind of small town outside Kyiv, which is where lots of people have their holiday homes, where lots of young families live. But it has just been turned into the site of absolute horror. And, for weeks it was occupied by Russia, and then there was a fierce battle as Russia withdrew. And when we drove in there on Saturday, if you can imagine, it's these beautiful forests and really kind of quiet lanes, lots of kind of summer houses. And we drove in there, and the people that we spoke to and the soldiers that we spoke to just described these scenes of absolute horror. And I'm sure, lots of people in the UK would have seen the pictures coming out of the actual town of Bucha. There's bodies lying on the streets, people have been executed, they've had their hands tied behind their backs. And we spoke to a soldier who described finding a basement of a summer house where there were bodies of men, women and children who'd been tortured and left there. In in the woods just around Bucha, we could see very kind of recent signs of the Russians having been there. That, they sort of thrown away their ration packs and things like that. And we spoke to this older woman, Maria. She's 80 years old, who told us about that the Russian soldiers had come to her house and were asking her questions about who was there. And she asked them, well, what are you doing here? And they said, oh, it's just our job. We're just following orders. But it seems that these orders and their job that they were doing was just committing atrocities. When the soldiers withdrew, then Maria found out that 3 of her neighbors had been tied up and executed. And this is not just a couple of cases. This is dozens, if not hundreds, of people that we're seeing that have been killed.
Yeah, it would be almost unimaginable were it not for your reports and for the pictures, as you say, which are flooding our screens and smartphones and computer screens the entire time now. It may be impossible to answer this question, Louise, but what do you imagine the Russian soldiers responsible for this sort of atrocity, what might they have been trying to achieve? Or is this just, I don't know, the unleashing of inhumanity?
I suppose what they were trying to achieve was what the Russian army has done before in places like Grozny, and what they assisted the Syrian regime in doing, and Aleppo. It is the mass subjugation of a civilian population, attempt to wipe out any form of sort of life really in the areas that they control. This isn't that the Russian soldiers in places like Bucha, they weren't trying to it's not a hearts and minds campaign. They were trying to subjugate and press down the civilian population there.
But is it having anything like that effect, or is it stirring a greater desire for retribution and for justice and stiffening the resolve of Ukrainians and not weakening it?
Absolutely. And I think there's a very strange sort of contrast, a real cognitive dissonance that's been going on, because in the center of Kyiv now there's been this period of calm. Restaurants have been reopening and that even bars have started reopening, and then just 20 minutes outside the city we have these scenes of horror. And I think people have just been hit with absolute disbelief, fury, and of course people were angry anyway. But the soldiers that I spoke to, there's one particular soldier that I spoke to outside Bucha on Saturday, and I said, what do you think of the Russian soldiers? And he says, we're not going to take we are not going to take prisoners anymore. These are animals. Even they're worse than animals. Even animals wouldn't do this. So that the fury is absolute. There's anger, there's sadness, and there's no celebration. It's not, people aren't saying, oh, these areas have been liberated, how fantastic, we can start getting on with our lives. People are absolutely furious.
Can I just lastly ask you, Louise, for your personal perspective on this? You are, I know, an experienced correspondent in areas of conflict. You've seen horrors, which, as I say, most of us can barely imagine. Can anything prepare you for what you have been seeing over the past days?
I don't think it can. And I think, even though in conflicts there's some things that always kind of look the same, right? There's civilians who get displaced, there's houses that are reduced to rubble, there's bodies in morgues or on the streets. Then this time it feels, I think, it feels very unique, and it feels particularly horrifying for the people that I've spoken to. I think this is not, especially in the areas around Kyiv, there's not been a war going on there for a long time. People have not become inured to these scenes. This is very, very fresh. I mean, just a month ago, this was, just like any normal European city. You could have been in, Budapest or Paris, and then now having these absolute atrocities unfold right on the outskirts. So it's very fresh. It's very, very new and very brutal.
Okay. Louise Callahan, live on the line there from Kyiv. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on the show this afternoon.